This is the story of penicillin, the accidental drug that saved millions. The year is 1928. A young Scottish physician named Alexander Fleming returns from a vacation to find a plate of bacteria-filled agar in his lab has been contaminated by a mold. At first, he's upset about this contamination because it ruins the experiment he was working on. But upon closer inspection, he notices something strange. The mold had not only killed the bacteria around it, but it had also created a clear zone around itself in the agar. This observation would change the course of medical history and save countless lives. But before we dive into the discovery of penicillin, let's take a step back and look at the world at this time. Prior to the early 20th century, doctors had very few weapons in their arsenal when it came to fighting bacterial infections. Sure, they had things like bed rest, fresh air, and plenty of fluids, but these were about as effective as a band-aid on a gunshot wound. And if that wasn't bad enough, many of the treatments that were used actually did more harm than good. For example, one popular treatment for tuberculosis was to take the patient out into the mountains and essentially starve them until their body burned off all the bad stuff. Then, in the early 1900s, Paul Ehrlich, a German physician, developed something called salvarsan, which was the first synthetic drug that could be used to treat syphilis. But while this was a major breakthrough, salvarsan had its own set of problems. It was toxic and it couldn't be used to treat other types of bacterial infections. This is where penicillin came in. But in order to understand how this moldy piece of bread led to the discovery of one of the most important drugs in history, we need to talk about what bacteria are and how they cause disease. Bacteria are single-celled organisms that live in colonies and reproduce by binary fission, which is just a fancy way of saying they make copies of themselves really fast. When they enter your body, they start multiplying and consuming your cells for food, releasing toxins that damage your tissues and cause an immune response which leads to inflammation and fever. Your body tries to fight back by sending white blood cells to the site of infection. But if the bacteria multiply faster than your body can kill them, you get sick. Now, in 1928, scientists knew that bacteria were the cause of many different types of illnesses. But they didn't know why some people got sick while others didn't. They also didn't know how to target bacteria without harming the patient. So in order to treat an infection, doctors would just prescribe a broad-spectrum antibiotic that would kill off any type of bacteria. But this approach has some major drawbacks. First, it could lead to the development of antibiotic resistance, which makes the bacteria population less susceptible to antibiotics over time. Second, it can also disrupt the balance of bacteria in the body, leading to side effects like diarrhea and an increased risk of infection. Enter Alexander Fleming, a Scottish physician who was born in 1881. He studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh and then joined the laboratory of the inoculation department at the London Hospital. His research focused on the white blood cells in the human body and how they responded to infection. In 1922, he became head of the inoculation department. It was here that he made his most famous discovery. In September of 1928, Fleming went on vacation to the Greek island of Hydra. While there, he attended a party where he met the actress and writer Gertrude Stein and her lover, Alice B. Toklas. The three of them hit it off so well that when Fleming returned to London, he invited them both to visit him. But unfortunately, the visit was cut short when Toklas became ill and had to return to Paris. As a parting gift, Fleming gave Toklas a plate of Staphylococcus bacteria to grow on this piece of bread. When Fleming returned to work in September, he found that the bacteria had grown on the bread and contaminated his experiments. He threw out the old plates and prepared new ones. But when he went to throw out the contaminated plate, he noticed something strange. Around the mold there was a clear zone where no bacteria had grown. Intrigued, he removed the mold from the plate and placed it on another plate of agar. The mold grew, and so did the clear zone around it. Fleming had stumbled upon the world's first antibiotic. He named it penicillin after the mold that produced it, Penicillium notatum. But Fleming was not the first to discover that mold could kill bacteria. In fact, in 1926, a scientist named Ernest Chain and his wife, a medical student named Gertrude Rousing, had published a paper on the same topic. The problem was that they didn't do any follow-up studies. But Fleming was not the only one who noticed this phenomenon. In 1929, a Swiss scientist named Albert von Ehring reproved Fleming's experiment was able to grow pure cultures of penicillin. However, neither Fleming nor von Ehring realized the potential of their discovery. It wasn't until 1941 that penicillin was tested on humans for the first time. By this point, Chain and his colleagues at Oxford University had managed to grow large quantities of penicillin in the lab. On September 6, 1941, Chain injected himself with 0.5 milligrams of penicillin. But it wasn't until 10 days later that Chain and his team began to notice a difference. The injection site became less painful, and the number of white blood cells in Chain's body began to decrease. By October, the experiment was deemed a success, and Chain was cured of his infection. Within months, penicillin was being mass-produced and shipped to U.S. military hospitals. News of the drug's effectiveness spread quickly, and soon doctors were using it to treat everything from pneumonia to gonorrhea. By 1945, over 100,000 people had been treated with penicillin. It was credited with saving the lives of more than 20,000 wounded soldiers. So what makes penicillin so special? Why has it been around for almost a century and is still used today? Well, it's not perfect. There are some bacteria that are resistant to it, and some people are allergic to it. But overall, it's very effective and relatively easy to use. And because it targets bacteria, it doesn't harm the patient in the process. But despite its many benefits, penicillin was not always accepted by the medical community. Some doctors were skeptical of the drug and its long-term effects. Others worried that it would be overused and lead to antibiotic resistance. And then there was the issue of supply. For many years, penicillin was in short supply, and the demand for it far outweighed the supply. Despite these challenges, penicillin has saved countless lives. It's been used to treat everything from minor infections to life-threatening diseases. And it's estimated that over 100 million people have been treated with penicillin every year. But penicillin is not the only antibiotic out there. In fact, there are hundreds of different types of antibiotics that can be used to treat bacterial infections. Some of the most common ones are tetracyclines, macrolides, and quinolones. Each one works a little differently, but they all target some aspect of the bacteria that allows them to survive. For example, some antibiotics target the cell wall of the bacteria, while others target the process by which bacteria replicate. As you might have guessed, though, bacteria are constantly evolving, and they are developing ways to become resistant to the antibiotics we throw at them. Researchers are working on new ways to combat antibiotic resistance, but it's a never-ending battle. As soon as we develop a new antibiotic, bacteria seem to find a way to evolve and become resistant to it. This is why it's so important that we use antibiotics wisely. If we keep using them when we don't need to, or using them incorrectly, we'll eventually run out of options and we'll go back to a time when a simple cut could kill you. So next time you hear someone say that penicillin is overhyped, or that antibiotics are just a bunch of drugs that doctors prescribe unnecessarily, you'll know better. Penicillin is a miracle drug that has saved countless lives, and it deserves all the hype it gets. Thank you for watching.